Hello, everyone. I'm Jean Krasno, and I'm here today with Miss Virginia Gamba. Most recently, Ms. Gamba was the special representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict, and now she is a candidate for Secretary General. Ms. Gamba, welcome, and congratulations on your candidacy. Um, Before we talk about your vision for the UN, I thought we'd briefly chat about your biography. And I understand that you were born in Argentina, but that you grew up in other countries in Latin America. And I thought perhaps you could give us a little background on that and then also where you went to school. So please.
Wonderful. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be with you, Jean. I've known you for many years
Many years.
and always been a good friend. I think it's weird. I am a fifth generation Argentine. It's my only nationality, unlike other Argentines that have double nationality because they're first generation. I come from a long, long, long line of Argentines. But being the case, my father's work took us out of the country very early. So I only lived in Argentina until I was 2. And then we traveled to Bolivia with him, and I was very young, so I didn't go to school in Bolivia. But then after that, we returned to Argentina. I was 1 year in school in Argentina when I was 5 in the city of Cordoba, a tiny, tiny, tiny hamlet that had only the one little school, rural school, run by nuns. And I learned how to read there. But then I went to Peru. I did all my schooling in Peru. Primary school, middle school, secondary school was in Peru. And then, unfortunately, I graduated very young when I was 15. And so the university would not take me on until I was 18. And so I was forced to do additional schooling in Europe. So I did schooling in London and additional schooling in Switzerland. And then I ended up in Newcastle upon Tyne, where I did my university. I was at the time 17. They allowed me the 1 year exception. And then I graduated at 20. And then at 27, I went back to university to Wales to do my master's. I did a short stint learning as well in the University of Salamanca in Spain, just because I had to buy time. I was too young.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad I asked you about that. So, as a candidate, you are a woman born in Argentina, from Latin America, and yet your nomination has come from another country. Can you explain this strategy?
Well, I've always been Virginia Gamba. I have never allowed myself to be or think that I am the job I occupy. I think it's very important. So I am an independent, I have always been an independent expert, researcher, writer, teacher. And I see myself as a citizen of the world. And although I love my country very much, and I live there, I've retired in Argentina, obviously, I thought that the United Nations needs an independent person that can be impartial, that can be transparent, that can say whatever needs to be said. And I think I will have much more freedom of action if I'm not nominated by my own country. Not because Argentina has any problem. I would do the same was I born in Peru or in Colombia or wherever. I think it's important that the accountability and the responsibility is on my shoulders and not on my country.
Excellent. Thank you for explaining that. You have had more than a decade of experience within the UN organization itself. What were some of those experiences, and how have they prepared you to become Secretary General?
Frankly, I think I became prepared to be Secretary General my whole life, not just my UN background. I am lucky that I went through life in many different jobs. I work for the private sector, I work for NGOs, I work for academia, I work for grant-making institutions and foundations. I work for regional organizations such as the African Union. I lived in many continents. I lived 10 years in Africa, I lived 10 years in Europe, I lived 10 years in the United States, in many cities, Chicago, Washington, New York. And I'm a late comer to the United Nations. I only have about 15 years experience within the United Nations, but those 15 years were all at senior level. So although I started my work at the UN at the director level, a D2 level, I was very quickly promoted to Assistant Secretary General and then Under Secretary General. And I think for the last 8 years, I have been Under Secretary General. I think it's the longest serving Argentine individual at that level. And I've gone through several Secretary Generals in their cabinets. And I think that's what prepares me very well, because I've seen the ups and downs of the organization. I have worked in many different departments of the organization. So I have been moving laterally as a professional, a little bit like Kofi Annan did. You know,
That's
so I
right,
get
yeah.
to see a little bit of everything, more than just one job. I get to see the organization, the institution. And I've held both administrative posts, like a D2 is always administrative. It's not substance, it's administrative. But as soon as you get to the Under Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General, it becomes more political while still being accountable for management. That's where the buck stops. So I think I am very well prepared because I understand the crisis the United Nations has gone through over the last 15 years.
And you were in the Office of Disarmament, and you had a very high-level position in investigating the use of chemical weapons in Syria.
Yes, and I think that was possibly my real baptism of fire, because no one had ever done that job before. There were no precedents. There was nothing I could quote as being a precedent to do the job I was forced to do, because once it is a Security Council resolution, it's legally binding, and you have to implement it. And I started it from scratch. It was a really tough job, but it taught me the dynamics of the Security Council like nothing else.
Yes.
And although I have been working with the Security Council nonstop, at least on a monthly, if not weekly basis, with all its members for the last 8 years, it was the 2 years where I was beholden to a Security Council job that was created by the Security Council. And I was the first incumbent of that job. That really opened my eyes as to the dynamics of the Security Council.
Yeah, a very tough job. And I knew you then, and we met several times and interviewed you on that issue. Now, what prompted you to run for Secretary General?
I think whatever I say is going to sound hypocritical, because I think people in their minds consider the job of Secretary General as some type of prize. It's a little bit like, you know, you might think Nobel Peace Prize, something. For me, it never was a prize, least of all now. I think it's a burden. I think it's a huge burden. I have never seen a Secretary General that does not age substantially the minute they take on that job. So for me, it was, I know it's a burden. I know possibly it's the worst possible time to apply for that position, because there's a lack of credibility, a lack of funds, a lack of power, a lack of authority right now. And the world is changing. There's a lot of violence. You are in the public sphere. There's a lot of media. And there's a lot of myths about where people are and what's happening. And I retired about 6 months ago. I retired in August 2025, in the middle of this massive crisis. And although I am incredibly happy in my retired life, I have a house, I have my family with me. I am very happy, very happy. I'm writing books again. I've written 40 books, and at last I can write books again, because you cannot while you are in the UN system. So, under all perceptions, I would be happier if I just stayed in retirement out of all the political mess and the financial issues. Doesn't attach to me. But I simply could not walk away from an obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And I consider it my duty.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have considered my duty, I think, only in this particular circumstance. It just happens that I'm an expert in crisis management.
Yeah. Yeah.
I come from the field of strategic studies. I'm an expert on peace, security, mediation, negotiation, and de-escalation of crisis. That's what I enjoy. That's what I know how to do. I felt very strongly that you need that type of expertise, that type of experience, that type of empathy now to restore, if you wish, credibility to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I also have got something that I believe no one else has got, which is a deep empathic mechanism with the peoples of the world, because I've lived, suffered, cried, and laughed with rural communities, and city communities, and governments in over 30 countries all my life. I've all my life been a foreigner, but all my life I've always helped the governments that housed me, and I've always helped the organizations that employed me and the students that I taught. And through them, I learned about cultures and needs and perceptions. And I think the credibility of the world versus the United Nations has to be built from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I put all that together, I just could not walk away to my golden sunset. Not because I missed it, which I don't, but because I think if you know you have what it takes, if you have the experience, I have over 55 years work experience just on peace and security in 3 continents. I've seen everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have hope in the future. I believe that there must be a United Nations. I think I know what needs to happen for it to be restored to the confidence of the world in the organization. And I just could not walk away knowing that I have today what it takes. And funnily enough, if it had been any other time, 5 years ago, 5 years from now, I might have just wished everybody good luck and let me be in peace, writing my books, painting my paintings, and managing my garden. But right now, I feel a duty and an obligation to put the skills God gave me
Mm-hmm.
and the experience life taught me
Mm-hmm.
to face it. Somebody has to face the music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not scared of the burden, and I'm not scared of losing face, and I'm not scared of being hurt by being Secretary General at all.
That's such reassuring words. Thank you so much. Now, some have criticized the UN for being too bureaucratic and siloed in its functioning. As Secretary General, how would you begin to overcome these silos and build synergy?
I think the problem of the United Nations is that it mirrors perfectly the member states that conform it.
Mm-hmm.
I have worked for many governments, or in many governments. I have worked in many regional organizations over many decades. And I have yet to find one that was not siloed, one that didn't have interagency jealousy. So I think the issue of defending one's turf is embedded in the culture of professional people, even in academia. The backstabbing in academia is unbelievable. Everybody's trying to mark their spot because everybody knows that spots depend on resources and on others inching in on your turf. So the UN is not different from that. Everybody is insecure. Offices are created that no one had decided upon based on assessed needs. The UN is what its members have made it into. It started lean and mean with a very clear object. And over the years, member states have piled responsibilities and functions on it that it never wanted or craved. But now it has to respond to what so many 80 years of being added functions. So it has become a bit of a Frankenstein. And I think it has to be helped out of that monstrosity into, again, a lean, mean, confident, and useful, fit for purpose organization. And I would know how to do that because I'm a strategist.
Excellent. Thank you so much. What do you see as your strategy in dealing with the Security Council, and particularly the permanent 5 members?
Well, I refuse to have prejudgments. I think people are frustrated. I think governments are frustrated. I remember the first conversation I ever had to deal with at intergovernmental level was in Finland in 1991, when people were talking about whether the Security Council was fit for purpose, or whether it should be larger, or whether regions should be present. So that discussion has been going on forever. The discussion of power wielding and whether it's fair or unfair. We've dealt with the Security Council that was divided for over the whole of the Cold War era.
That's true.
And we survived it, and it served the purpose. So the way I look at the Security Council is I remember the beginning of everything. And I think people are confused. Depends on what the narrative is. And people choose narratives because you interpret facts according to your own best interest, obviously. People like to think that the Security Council emerged and the UN itself emerged because of a bunch of winning countries that won a war. That's not true. I think the UN emerged, and the Security Council as its executive body really emerged because of the shame of not having been able to stop the Second World War. The shame of sitting on top of millions of bodies. And it's very clear, if you read the charter with the eyes that you should read it, you will see that there were countries that survived the war, that promised the people of this planet that they would prevent another such war. And the Security Council is supposed to be in charge of that. So I have no problem dealing with the Security Council. I believe that the object of the Security Council is that of prevention of Armageddon. And I think they still should do that. So I know how to deal with the Security Council as long as the Security Council remembers its roots. And perhaps what they really need is someone to listen. I'm a good listener. And someone that is old enough and experienced enough that can tell them, well, you know, this was tried before, it didn't go very well. Perhaps you should do something else. Not tell them what to do, but be an advisor as possible and as required. But I would have no problem whatsoever in dealing with the Security Council as this.
Some secretaries general see their role as behind the scenes, and others use the media to reach out to the public. How do you plan to work with the media?
The world changes. The world is not static. Tomorrow is different from today. So you have to move with the times. There are particularities of this age that need to be taken into account. Social media, communications, even artificial intelligence and all the scary stuff that brings with it, but the technology alone, the communications, the power of communications today are such that you can no longer have the choice of operating behind the scenes with no one knowing. So for me, it's very important to incorporate the media. It's very important to be transparent and truthful and to inform the people. It's almost like writing a story. You tell people what you're going to say it, and you tell them what you said. It's a classic method of writing a good article. And that's how I would take it. I think there are moments when clearly negotiations need peace and quiet. Negotiations need a safe space to happen with no leakages. You must have that sacred space where commitments, compromises emerge, where there are win-win situations that emerge, that is in no one's interest to see the blow by blow of how you got there. At the same time, it is unreal to think that you can do this in a totally closed communicational space. So for me, I would do both. I would always choose the space for quiet discussions and mediation, but also find a way in which you can also inform and keep the public at large that is worried.
Yes,
There's no
right.
reason to have people worry when one is trying to resolve something. Ultimately, we're all part of a solution, not all part of a problem.
On another topic, there have been reports of incidents of sexual exploitation and abuse. How would you deal with allegations of something like that, either within the staff or within UN peacekeeping?
Again, this is something to me extremely interesting. I would have handled it differently had I had the power or authority at the time to do anything about it. But let's be honest. Most of the sexual exploitation and abuse that has been reported has really emerged when the UN is operating with peace support forces in a specific context of a crisis, be it in Haiti, be it in Mali, be it in Angola, be it in the former Yugoslavia. And these abuses are invariably committed by soldiers or policemen that have been sent there by troop contributing countries that are contributing to the creation of a peacekeeping force. I've I've done 2 years of research with 16 case studies many years ago. That's when I met you. That looked at how peace support operations handled the interpretation of their mandates and how governments contributed troops to specific Security Council resolution decisions. And I've always said, for the last 30 years, if not more, that it's imperative that troop contributing countries be not allowed to serve unless they go through a very, very strict mechanism of choosing. They have to be trained, they have to be pre-deployment training, but there must be a zero tolerance attitude that must be signed on by troop contributing countries with the UN, that at the first hint of something of this type happening, that person must be taken out and judged by their own forces in their own country. And then the troop contributing country that allowed this to happen or that sent these people to the place and then failed to keep them under control or according to the principles and the rules and the norms of the organization, they should be barred from sending their troops or being allowed to form part of peacekeeping, peace support operations for a number of years. And I think if we had done that many years ago, I think the problem is as the big players abandoned the UN and decided, it's a little bit hypocritical, but for the golden age of peacekeeping and peace support operation were vast operations like El Salvador, like Cambodia, like UNPROFOR. They were vast, 20, 30,000 people, civilian, military, everything was peace building, everything was engaged, even administering countries like in Namibia, for example,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
So you had these vast operations, and the one thing in common with all those vast operations was that the big powers and the Security Council members sent their forces to these peacekeeping and peace support operation, highly complex, even peace enforcement operations. They sent their own soldiers. And then I think they got tired of being killed. So they thought, okay, we pull out, we give capacity to the regions to produce their own peacekeeping forces. Let someone else be killed. That's how I explain it better. And then there was a very big push to create peacekeeping, peace support schools and training schools in conflict-affected regions. Now, this was good because it trained a lot of professional soldiers that were very good at their task. But ultimately, as the resources dwindled and the political willingness to resolve protracted conflicts that required many years of peacekeeping and peace support operations inside, I think it all became a bean counting exercise about resources. And the part about the principles, about the professionalism, about the norms expected started to be put in the back burner. It has to be brought back. It's a privilege to go and help another country that is going through a crisis at the request of the Security Council. It's a privilege and it's a great responsibility. It's not an opportunity to make a quick buck or to get rid of some soldiers that one cannot use. So I know what I would do with CA in those cases.
Thank you. That's a very good, thorough explanation. When you see a threat to international peace and security, in the Charter, Article 99, the Secretary General is given the authority to bring this issue to the attention of the Security Council. So, in what way would you use that? And do you think you would need to consult with members of the Security Council or the P5 before doing that?
Well, I think again, I cannot give you a very clear and direct answer because it's not a very clear situation. What is a clear and present danger? If you know your job and you have good early warning mechanisms, you can see a crisis coming even years before it explodes.
That's true.
So you have to start working on prevention. You have to do the work because deterrence is precisely trying to avoid a situation before it loses control and escalates. So I would put a lot of effort into trying to persuade, dissuade, engage with parties to conflict much before a conflict emerges. I would warn about it to the Security Council.
I see.
I would talk to member states about it. I would educate about it, and I would try to do something before a crisis starts. Now, one would have to be divine to be able to see crises that emerge that come as a total surprise. And there are total surprises. So I'm not saying that every crisis can be stopped 2 years before it really flares. You can try to contain, mitigate, and stop conflict from becoming a crisis with intelligence, with patience, and with talking and bringing everybody into that discussion, all the stakeholders and all the member states and the Security Council, and keep them apprised of that situation. But when something extraordinary happens, and you can see and you have information that something extraordinary is happening, that is creating a lot of grief, a lot of violence, then I know also how I would act, which would be, first of all, verify the information. Today, with communications, with social media, with a high politicization in communications and in the press, with fake news, with artificial intelligence, you don't want to create a crisis where there was none. So first, for me, is verify. Verify the information, get alternative sources of information before I run. The second thing I would do is I would talk to the stakeholders in question on the phone, which I can do as Secretary General, and get first-hand information from their point of view. I would listen. And then I would go. If I would try to persuade them to invite me to go and do my own assessment of the situation. At that point in time, I would be able to feel strong enough that I would call a meeting of the Security Council and ask them to, or at least request of them, to give me a couple of weeks to try to resolve it in a way that is contained. When you're talking of millions of people suffering or about to go through a huge situation like happened in Rwanda, I think we cannot wait. And in those cases, it takes, people don't understand, it takes 6 to 12 months to put a peacekeeping or a peace support force together. So then you have to work with member states that can have a quick reaction, that have got quick reaction forces. And then you negotiate with them that perhaps this could be seconded to the Security Council for a limited amount of time until such a time that the situation is stable, and then the Security Council can study it and decide on what type of final resolution it wishes to have. But you can do nothing in the United Nations unless you have the will of the member states behind you. Yeah. I would expect to be the partner of every single member state. I think the UN is not above its members. It's a product of its members. But at the same time, there are too many members that are often divided, that are often highly politicized behind one pet peeve or other. And you can become the great interpreter, where you can assist member states in the interpretation of their fears. And you can become the third, wheel and serve to either allay their fears or express concern about something that they should be doing that they're not doing. But I would never, and the SG can never, and the UN can never take decisions on its own.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Here's another question. How strongly would you defend the independent status of the Secretariat and resist pressures to nominate people to certain positions for political reasons rather than merit?
Well, luckily for me, I'm going to be, I'm sure I'm going to win. Luckily for me, I will be a Secretary General at a time when the whole world, including the peoples of the world, want to see a lean and mean UN. So usually when you get the gravy in the turkey is when there is gravy. There is no resource, there are no monies, there is no political will for a large UN. So by its own weight, the pressure of member states to go around nominating or creating false posts just to have representation will disappear on its own accord. So I don't think there will be pressure, one. And two, everybody wants to see efficiency and competence. And I think that's what primes today. If it was 10 years ago, it was a different story. But I'm not worried at all about this because you have to surf with the wave. And the wave is about efficiency and lean and mean and fit for purpose. So everybody's going to go with that.
Now, earlier you mentioned the crisis that the UN is facing, and one of those is trust.
Yeah.
How would you restore trust at the UN and with the UN and inspire member states and the public and civil society?
You have to lead by example. You have to stop wheeling and dealing in the dark. You have to be able to tell everybody exactly what you intend to do, exactly what the information is. If you are there for member states and you are there for people and you listen, then I do believe that dynamic in itself will restore trust. Half the time, trust is destroyed by silence and by secrets. People assume things. When there is silence, you tend to assume and interpret the silence of others. And you do it according to your own value system and your own fears. So you have to talk. You have to bring the elephant to the room. I've always managed all the mediations and negotiations I've done with really difficult stakeholders, sometimes in the field, sometimes in New York, and I always use the same strategy. I bring the people around the table. I don't like to have separate meetings with everybody. Bring the people to the table and then put the problem in the middle of the room. You put the problem in the middle of the table and you don't judge whose problem it is. It's a problem for all of us. If there is a crisis, it's for all of us. It's external to us. I'm not going to judge you. This is the problem we have. How are we going to resolve this problem that is external to us? And I think once you start generating distance between the problem and trying to ascribe the problem to one act or another one, it's so easy to go around throwing guilt and blaming people. We do it in families, we do it in schools, we do it in the business. Everybody blames everybody else. Everybody's a saint. But that's because we're not recognizing that there is a problem. You bring the elephant to the room, you discuss the elephant in the room without ascribing guilt to anybody. Say, okay, what are you going to do to contribute to restore this issue? The minute you do that, the result might not be a solution, but it will bring trust. It will bring trust that the UN has finally become a safe environment to discuss inconvenient issues. And the other part of this is we cannot forget the people. And I'm not being democratic when I say it. I'm not being populist when I say it. I am reflecting the reality today. Today, everybody in the planet has a say because of social media, because of communications, because of technology, because the way we operate, everybody has a say. So the pressure is not just from powerful members. The pressure is not just economic or military or financial. The pressure sometimes is for the approval of people. And the people are fed information that they're not stupid. They know it's not right. So you have to go back to the charter and remember why we need the UN.
Mm-hmm.
We need the UN to help the people so that they will not have to go through a third world war. Bring the people on board.
And speaking of global problems, how would you address the issue of climate change and the Paris Agreement?
You know, I've been discussing when I was a member of the executive committee of Pugwash for years, in the 1980s, 1990s. And I recall that all the scientists of the world from all the big powers were present in the room when we were discussing what was going to happen with the weather, with climate, with population. And our hope then was to create models that after the world entered the 21st century in the year 2000 could become tested models on how we could survive the evolution of the planet. Call it whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing happened then that is happening now. Governments are the sum of its peoples, and people are lazy. I have yet to meet a family, a person, a student, I don't know, a business that doesn't wait for the last possible minute to try to respond to something that will require effort and money. Everybody is hoping problems will go away. Governments are not different from people. They are the sum of people. They are citizens that have got temporarily a responsibility as governments. Why would they think differently? So I think the problem with climate change is that it is an inconvenient truth. It has been tested by scientists from all over the world. Everybody knows about it for years, for decades, but everybody has chosen to turn a blind eye. There are conventions that have become very politicized and are interpreted whichever way any country wants to. Ultimately, you have to cut through all of that and say, okay, we're too late to change things that could have been changed 30 years ago. We're too late to change things that might change 30 years from now. So what can we do? Let's go back to basics. So for me, it is looking at priorities and doing phased priorities over and above existing commitments, because we really need to do something quickly about it. Mm-hmm. And it's not difficult. I spent 2 years studying what was the crux, what was the most important item that might lead to civilization collapse. And invariably, it was the mega city. Invariably. Invariably was the movement of people towards cities. Invariably, the cities were by the sea or by the coast of rivers.
Right. Yeah.
And the megalopolis, the idea of the giant city structure that far reduces its own services to rubble by the sheer size of it, generates a massive amount of energy requirements. The one place where energy is most used, funny enough, is transport. So for years, I've been trying to explain, and it's one of my hobbies, is to try to see how we can mitigate and adapt to what is coming. And for me, the easiest way would be to really invest in studying how to break up big cities into small cities that are self-contained. The future belongs to those that are self-sustaining and at peace as a community. If you're at peace in your community or in your government and you're self-sustaining, you don't need from anybody else anything, then the chances are very high that you can survive. And so for me, it should be the return of the principle of town and country planning, where you go to small cities, and in those small cities, it would allow people not to waste a lot of money on transport because everything would be within a reasonable distance. The job, the house, the services would be contained in your small city. And that alone is going to mitigate and give us time to be able to deal with the rest of the climate change results. So I am hopeful that if we change the approach without changing the conventions or the end results of that, and we stop putting the onus on a future that will never come unless people do what they have to do now, which they don't want to do because it's not pressing. So let's change the approach. Let's focus on people, people's needs, and for me, employment, reducing transport so that people stay and are happy where they are. They do not commute long distances. They don't have to move away to get a job. Is the future. And employment, absolutely. We need to rethink employment.
Yeah, yeah. Very wise thoughts. Now, for the last several years, the UN has been really supportive of the empowerment of women. The Security Council passed Resolution 1325 several years ago. How would you assess the achievement that the UN has made on the empowerment of women? And how do you see your role as would be the first Secretary General that's a woman, where you could bring your experiences in contrast to the perspectives of males who have been the leaders of the UN for all these 8 decades?
Well, again, everything is relative. Um, I don't know if the initiatives have prospered or not. I tend to think they have because I myself am a result of that.
That's true.
When I started my career, there was not a single woman in the military or in defense in the whole of Latin America. I was the first woman in defense in my country. And it was tough. There were no women in defense or in security. I remember I worked a lot with Catherine Kelleher and people like Nikki Ball in Washington, who were all trying to do the same thing. We were saying, why would professional women not be allowed to deal with peace and security and hard defense issues?
Yeah, true.
And so we created between us WISE, which was a mechanism.
Women and International
And
Security.
international security.
Yeah, I'm a member of WISE.
Which was a mechanism where we would mentor university students that were female and entice them to do magisters in peace and security and in hard security issues and not necessarily on development. So you can see the results of that because over the last 40 years, there's more and more women in defense and security. And I'm sure if you go worldwide and you look at the personnel in defense and security and even in the armed forces all over the planet, you're going to find a multitude of women. So I think women made an inroad in peace and security like never before. And I think that also became mirrored in more and more women being chosen in positions in cabinets, in ministries. There are more women in senior positions. There are women presidents. There are women prime ministers. So I don't know if it was the UN, but I think it was a global understanding in the 1990s and the early 2000s that we really were one, that you need women to prosper. So I think the UN mirrored the wishes of member states, and I think they were very good. So do we have a problem with empowerment of women? I would say no. I don't think we have a problem. What we have is we don't know what to do with the women that have been empowered. I would like to see a whole different approach understand women have been empowered. Women are there doing their jobs, but they have to be used for the right objective. And I think women are geniuses at operationalizing things. They are the great implementors because women don't like political visions. Women are the experts in taking something and making it happen. So the ones that have the ideas, the objectives are men. They like dreaming, you know, they like thinking big, but they don't know how to land. Women land the policies of men. So women have been empowered. They are now in high positions, but it's not about thinking. It's not about occupying a post. It's about being operative. And I think women are geniuses in implementation, in adaptation of existing resources to do the job. So if we had more women in operational capacities, doing the operational procedures of resolutions, we would see results.
Very good, very good. So just one last question. How would you see your legacy? You would certainly be the first woman Secretary General, but how would you like to see your legacy in the future?
I think it's, again, a very difficult answer to that. First of all, I would break away with the idea of a Secretary General being able to have 2 terms. I don't believe in 2 terms. I don't believe it politically for governments, and I don't believe it for the job of Secretary General. I think 5 years is fine. Perhaps it could be extended to 6, like Ban Ki-moon wants. I think 5 is a perfect amount of time for anybody. Because, as you know, power corrupts. And the more you are in power, the more you are devoid of reality. So you really need to stay focused. And I think 5 years is enough. So where do I see my legacy? I possibly would be not, it's almost immaterial to say the first woman Secretary General. In fact, I resent that. I resent it because, in a way, for a woman to be handed that job at the worst possible moment of the UN, it's almost set to fail. So that if it fails, the fault was because it was led by a woman. I resent that.
Okay.
So what I'm thinking of is I will be Secretary General. I think I'm the right person for the job at the right time. Perhaps only now I'm the right person for the right job because it's the right time for a person like me. What would be my legacy? I think it would be setting the house in order.
Okay.
Creating the confidence and the trust needed so that whoever comes afterwards, and the member states that come afterwards, because member states don't change, but their administrations change.
Yeah, yeah.
The people that come afterwards can actually find a useful tool that they will know how to use for the common good. So my legacy is to build the table again. And if I can just set the room up for others to be able to eat in it, I'm happy with that.
Very good, very well said. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Gamba, for sharing your time with us today. I'm Jean Krasno, faculty member at the City College of New York. Please check out our website, the campaign to elect a woman Secretary General, at www.womansg.net. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.